Join Jesus where he's already at work. We dream of the day where every home in America is adopted by one or more persons living the prayer, care, share lifestyle. Our host, Gary Kendall, began Love KC with the desire to see every home in Kansas City prayed for. Join with him to make this happen. Now, on to the Blessed Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Blessed Podcast, where we join Jesus where he's already at work, where we live, learn, work, and play. I'm so excited today to introduce you to my friend Jonathan Wallace from Unite Dallas. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Gary. Thanks for having me today.
It is so fun to be able to take these conversations we have almost monthly and be able to share some of the content with our listeners. And if you're just joining in today, let me just welcome you and say that you can find the Blessed Podcast on iTunes and on Google Play. You can also find it at the lovekc.net resource page. So if you go to lovekc.net, our website, and do /resources, you'll see the podcast. All of them are there. They're easy to share from there. I would also say a way that a lot of people like to listen and follow is on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, you actually can see Jonathan and you can meet him and hear it. And some people prefer that. So we're so glad you're here. I always encourage you to subscribe so you see the next one that comes, and then share these with others so we can grow together. Well, Jonathan, I have been delighted since the formation of Love KC about 4.5 years ago now to be able to track along with what's happening in Unite Dallas. It's been inspirational, and I can't wait for you to get to tell people some of this journey that you guys are on.
Awesome. Well, we are so blessed to have partners like you who have come alongside us in the past few years.
Very good. So let's dive right in, okay? So let me set it up by saying this. If you're listening today, you're probably used to hearing us in the Blessed Podcast talk about what individuals can do to live on mission. You heard it right in the introduction. Join Jesus where he's already at work, where you live, learn, work, and play. So living on mission is our MO. And we're often talking about it from the standpoint of the individual, which I often call the micro. So the micro is when you pray, care, or share. And if you do, you're going to immediately see God working in the lives of those who are within your sphere of influence. It's so fun to see what happens. I can almost set my watch to the time a person says, I'm going to begin to pray for my neighborhood, to when they start having these God experiences. And someone texts or calls or gets on our Facebook group, Living on Mission, and tells a story. It's just, it never fails. But today we're going to take it up a level from that, and we're going to be talking about what happens in the macro. So that if you're the micro as an individual, what happens in the macro? When we all act in similar kinds of ways as disciples making disciples, we're going to see a result that hopefully can transform our city. And I'd make the case, Jonathan, and you might start by talking about this. We really can't transform our city. We really even can't move the needle unless we choose to work together. The cities are too big, too diverse. We really need each other. We need the macro and the micro.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I would 100% agree. And I would even piggyback on that in saying we're bold enough to interpret Jesus' prayer in John 17 as saying, when we're unified, that we show the world that we are unified in the same way the Trinity is unified, which is a supernatural unity. And so There's supernatural power that's released when God's children come together and act as one body, as I believe that we're called to biblically.
Yeah, I like it. And then the world will know we are his disciples.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that. What are you seeing these days at Unite in terms of helping people to be able to maybe lay down their logos and their egos to be able to pick up something that's collaborative and work together towards city transformation? What's that looking like in Dallas?
Yeah, so we talk about it in terms of issues, and we divide up who we're working with and what we're working on by geography. So our geographical scope is 6 counties across Dallas, Fort Worth, and we've subdivided all of those into regions and issues, like I said. So if someone is focused on racial reconciliation, And if they're focused in a specific area, we want to try and help connect the people that are doing that with the other people in their area. So if there are other churches, if there are other organizations like nonprofits, even local businesses who have the same goals as either individuals or church leaders who are bringing alongside their congregations, we help connect them with those broader movements so that we can release that collective impact that we believe is greater than us operating as individuals.
Great. So the people can choose inside of a geographical region to work in an area of their passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we partner alongside people, and we break it up by communities or neighborhoods, as we've talked about, where around a school, people can collaborate with a school and with the geography around a school. They can figure out which issues are prevalent in that area. And those are all across DFW. There are about 1,000 of those communities. And then we kind of cluster those up into bigger and bigger geographies where then those people are collaborating at larger and larger geographic levels. And there are really kind of a myriad of different issues that are interwoven, are being worked on at all those various different levels.
Yeah, I love that. So are you saying, Jonathan, that like an elementary school would roll up into the same geographic region as a middle school, the same as a high school, and then that becomes one area inside of a designated region, and people inside of that school district then work together in ways that fit their passion and their calling?
Exactly. Yeah. So there might be different issues in one elementary school. We call them attendance zones. One elementary school attendance zone, then there would be even in the same zone that's larger for the middle school or for the high school, because it's a more specific context. You just end up seeing different issues. And so there's collaboration at that smaller level, but there's also collaboration on the larger level, where there's kind of a coordination of needs and of assets to see how we can best allocate our resources for maximum community impact.
Okay, so I have a ton of questions, but we'll start with the simple one. So let's say that, well, first of all, I'd love for you to tell like some of the different areas of passion. I'm assuming that, some homelessness might be one, or maybe, food security might be another, but what are some of the passion areas? And then are they the same in every one of the zones? Like there's ones that are always standard, or there's some that are present and some that aren't present in others?
It's context dependent. So there are some that are present in some and not in others. We have seen that particularly homelessness, food insecurity, mental health, and education, or specifically reading level and literacy rates, are the four issues that we have seen have been exacerbated by COVID, and that we try and put at the front of people's minds as they're evaluating what kinds of issues are present in their communities. But there might be other things, like racial reconciliation would be a great example, where those might be more prevalent in certain geographies than others. So if the churches or the people in those communities recognize those more pressing issues, then we try and equip them with resources and with other people who are passionate about the same thing to address whatever their specific context is.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Reverse engineer things for a minute for us, like roll back the years a little bit, if you will. How did you get to this particular kind of a strategy? And what did it take to go from, hey, we're trying to do something that's scattershot across the whole city, which is what so many people have tried and failed at, to the regional approach that you're now sitting with?
Yeah. So our mission and vision have always been to inform, connect, and equip churches to meet the needs of their communities for the purpose of helping our communities flourish holistically. So we're not just looking at people one-dimensionally. We want to know what are all of the needs that an individual or even a community are facing, and how can we come alongside them to help them address those needs as a community. And so how we started doing that about 13 years ago was we just started seeing who was present in the community who was passionate about unity. because we believe that's really what's at the center of how we make a community impact. And so there was a handful of churches, and it really was just networking at the beginning. Who are the people who are maybe doing something in isolation, and can we pull them in to the group effort that's happening? And so for us, our scope being so broad, like I said, 6 counties, over time, it just became a necessity to subdivide that into smaller geographies than those counties. And so that's when we started with the idea of regions and region champions, which were people, particularly pastors, that were helping to coordinate groups within designated geographies. So they were coordinating all the different churches and all the different believers that were focused on community impact for whatever their region was. And then they were also coordinating with other region champions and listening in on what was happening across the rest of the Metroplex.
Yeah, it's great. Really good work to think about how do you scale something. I mean, it really sounds like you're building it to scale as you go. The one of the thoughts that's in my mind, and maybe a listener is actually having the same kind of thought. I'm sure there's churches involved, so maybe give me an idea of how many churches total are involved in Unite. But then, if you think about a particular region, choose any one of them. Region 2. I'm just select one out of the air. You know, what are the typical number of churches involved there? And the other question I want to ask, you can be thinking about it while you answer the first one, is how would business people get involved? Like, and I actually know because we've had this conversation about how integral people who bring their private sector work or their public sector work to Unite. I know they play a really valuable role. Probably, Jonathan, half or more of our listeners, aren't pastors. I think they're curious how many pastors and churches, but what if you're not? How do you play?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have a few different answers to that. So
Okay.
There are national platforms that are kind of broad in their scope that anyone can be a part of. So individual people, whatever sector they're in, regardless of if it's business or nonprofit or healthcare or the faith sector, you can engage with those platforms to be equipped and to galvanize you to act on whatever passion you have. So we talk about it in terms of issues. If you're really passionate about helping with food insecurity in your city or even in your neighborhood, there are certain resources that are available to you right now that would help you find where you can get involved with that issue. For businesses as organizational entities, we find that some, especially larger businesses, have efforts that they're already involved in philanthropically. And so our scope in terms of our vision is large enough to where we can conversate with those organizations and say, hey, we see overlap with what we're doing and what you guys are doing in this way. Is there some way that you would want to partner with us in this, since you are already involved in the community in this way? In terms of local businesses, it's easier to start that conversation if they don't already have anything established, where we can ask, we can say, is there anything you'd want to get involved with? Especially with this recent effort around communities and around elementary schools, it's easy to say, hey, we think that a lot of your clientele are going to be active in this community that we're focusing on with these churches. Is there something that you would want to jump in with? At the very least, we can get you involved in these meetings. But as far as how I would recommend anyone working with the business would get engaged, it starts with a conversation. What do we want to work on? Is there an issue that we're particularly passionate about? Is there an organization that we're familiar with that we might want to get involved with? So what's the first conversation that we can have around that to start making steps towards action?
Yeah, I love that. I think the person who's a business leader has like a two-pronged play. They definitely can serve, and they can join some kind of a serving effort that's already taking place. Yeah. Anyone can do that. But also they can bring the maybe the resources, the assets, or their skill to a particular thing. For example, I was with a person who owns a business that is a painting business this last week. We're talking about a particular project it's going to be a multi-million-dollar project. And we were really talking at a high level, but we weren't really very far into it before he goes, hey, I just want you to know, like, we'll handle all the painting and we'll do it for you for free. Like, it's a huge gift.
Yeah.
So I think that many times when I'm older now than you, Jonathan, and I'm glad that there's a younger generation that's going to do better than my generation did. But for years, for some reason, business leaders always seem to get slotted into, we'll make a job for you, instead of letting them come to the table and say, look, out of my experience, out of the resources I have, and out of my passion for making a difference, here's what I can do for this project. And they come as a legitimate player, right along with other pastor types who typically were maybe some of the first ones involved in the discussions. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to leverage the skills. And I love that you focused on skills, because I think that a lot of people think, I have my 9 to 5, and then I have where I volunteer. And those are two separate things. But I don't think there's a reason why you can't leverage what you're doing at least 40 hours a week to be able to bless people in different environments. I think we should try and leverage those ways that God is equipping us in whatever ways that we can.
Yeah. So I hope anybody who's listening today, you're just thinking about what you're passionate about and thinking about the geography where you live, and then asking yourself the question beyond your local church, which, hope you're engaged and involved at your local church, but beyond your local church, what can you do to collaborate with others, other churches, other ministries, or other efforts to be able to move the needle on human thriving? I feel like we need to blur the line between the secular and the sacred here, to say that when we really follow Jesus and we live with a kingdom attitude, a kingdom mentality, it's like the rising tide lifts all boats. Like whether something, I love the proclamation of the gospel. Like Love KC is really about prayer, evangelism, and discipleship at the core. But if we live as kingdom children of our Father, then what we do in our city is going to bless everybody, whether they ever believe what we believe or not.
Yeah.
And it lifts human suffering, and I think as such it pleases our Father. So I hope everybody listening is already thinking about, well, what are some ways I can get involved, or how can I leverage what I'm already doing? So Jonathan, a story I asked you to tell me a couple of months ago, I'd love for you just to kind of summarize for this group, is you guys had a banquet not too long ago, or I don't know if it's a banquet, you had an event. And at your event, you were casting vision, and you also were giving strategy with some tactics of how that this could become realistic and inside these regions.
Yeah.
Can you go back and tell that story just a little bit about what were you trying to do overall, and then what were some of the ways you went about it, and even a story or two that might go with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're referencing City Convene, which is our annual event where we bring leaders from around the city. And we talk about what has the church been doing this past year? What impact have we made on the community as a collective capital C church across DFW? What do we want to do? And how can you get involved? So what we talked about, the primary point of discussion, was our new model, which I've touched on briefly already, but we called it the community impact model. And so it's this idea of—
I love that name, by the way.
Me too. Yes, it took a long time for us to iterate and find something we were happy with, but I think everybody is pleased with that across the board. So basically, like I had said earlier, we had talked about things on a regional model, really for the past 7 or 8 years. That's the language that we had used, and that's how we were prompting people to get involved across those 6 counties that we're focused in. And so when people would think about what does it look like for me to get involved, just like you're saying, me as an individual or me as a church, either way, they were thinking about it in terms of, either a regional level or a DFW level. And so when we're talking about food insecurity, for example, they would hear, 650,000 people are dealing with food insecurity on a weekly basis. And so people would be intimidated and they would say, I do want to get involved, but how am I going to make a dent in that issue? So what we did is we took it down to an even more granular level. And like I said, we've defined those geographies that we're challenging people to take responsibility for around elementary schools. And so we're saying, okay, there are 5 or 6 churches in this 2 or 3 square mile walkable geography. What would it look like if those churches took responsibility for the needs present in this community? Maybe instead of 650,000 people that are dealing with food insecurity, now it's only 450. And so how do you guys find those people that have those needs, and how do you come alongside those other churches to introduce interventions in this specific geography where you can change the flourishing of maybe just a few thousand people? And so the scope and the vision for what we're trying to challenge churches and believers to do is a lot more tangible and a lot more manageable. And the idea is that, those little geographies make up all of DFW. So if everybody takes responsibility for their little slice, then we can hopefully make some major impacts and some major dents in what are otherwise those staggering, intimidating numbers. And so we have things established at the smaller levels. And like I said, they feed up into the larger levels where there is communication coordination across the Metroplex on multiple different levels, and people are in relationship and dealing with needs at all of those levels.
Yeah, so good. You know that I'm a little bit of a data geek in the sense that I really feel like it's always fun to tell anecdotal stories. Pastors are good at that. But if you don't have data, it's hard to really prove that anything's changing.
Yeah.
And until you have data that tells you what the finish line looks like, you don't have that pull toward the finish line. And I think you need that. If you could identify, to use your example, but I'll switch from food insecurity to homelessness of children. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I heard a statistic for Olathe, the city where I live in it's a suburb of Johnson County in Kansas City. And in Olathe, the last number I heard, it probably changes all the time, but it's somewhere around 450 kids. That's when you said that number, that's what made me think of this. 450 kids are homeless. They sofa surf, or they are at they don't have some of them sleep in cars, they're all over, but they don't have a place to call home. And it's a really large number. But if you were looking at it in the county, it would be in the thousands. It'd be a 5-digit number.
Yeah.
So it drops to 450. But if you can even go to an individual school, and you can say, oh, there's 13 in Countryside Elementary, and then that there's like 3 churches within 2 miles of Countryside Elementary. Can we address and help that? And that's what you're saying, is to be able to solve the big problems, you have to break them down into smaller bite-sized pieces.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we as a church, we have an average of 5 kids in a congregation of, let's say it's just 100 people. Well, maybe we don't need to adopt those kids, but we can sure make their quality of life better, even just with the resources that we all have available right now. But there are even other resources that we can get connected to that would help us better address the problems, even at that small level.
Yeah. It often boils down into the family systems.
Yeah.
What can we do to help address the problems in a family system that might end up with a child being homeless?
Yeah.
I was quite amazed maybe a month ago when you and I were talking, and you were sharing with me some of the resources that you draw together to be able to fuel your data for the various things that you're tracking. And a lot of it comes from government resources or is free. So can you tell I think there will be people like me listening who would be curious to know, okay, if you're going to talk about the kinds of things we've mentioned, where do you get your data? So you don't have to go into all of them, but I think it'd be helpful to surface a couple of those that maybe you use the most often.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the need, we have, I would say, 2 main resources, especially since COVID. We've been pulling data down from the U.S. Census Bureau. So they have something called the Household Pulse Survey, which they've been distributing every 3 or 4 weeks to a sample size of, I think, across the country, it's something like 100 million people to 200 million, depending on the stat that you're talking about. And they are asking flourishing questions across a variety of issues. So it is things like housing insecurity. How confident are you that you're going to be able to pay next month's rent? And so that's broken down by state. And then for the more populous areas, I think there are about 20 of them, they have data for even smaller geographies. So they have data for the Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington metropolitan area, which is right within our service area.
Yeah.
So we can
you
look
break that down by region, Jonathan, or is that something you have to do by hand, or do they break it down by counties? Or
it's something that we have to do by hand, and we can look at other sources of data that we have, and we can compare them when we have them on a regional or on a zip code level. But that data itself, we look at a DFW level, and then we see how we can apply those and look at that and try and interpret what that would be at a regional level.
Okay.
So we have those high level data and things like housing insecurity, mental health, food insecurity, those things. We're getting data from the government at a DFW level every few weeks. And then our second most significant source of data around needs is people that we call issue champions. And so we have members of our network who are experts for our various issues. So like, for example, for hunger, for food insecurity, Allison Reese, she's the executive director of a nonprofit called Super Bowl of Caring. She focuses on food insecurity for her job, 40 hours a week. And so she helps coordinate food drives with Super Bowl across the country, especially around the time of the Super Bowl once a year. And so she has food insecurity data that she's working with constantly, that she gives us access to, that we can interpret and that we can use across our network.
What a gift.
And that's the case for all of our issue champions. We have sources of data that they're working with, that they pull down and that they give to us and they help us interpret, because it also helps them with their 9 to 5, and we help give them referrals from our network. So it's a mutual beneficiary system that we have with our issue champions, where it helps us evaluate the need.
Yeah, if I would get on my soapbox for a minute, and I won't stay on it for a long time, but if we all do the work that we do and we knock ourselves out, we spend all the money that we spend and design all of these programs and plans, and the needle never moves. We have to look at ourselves and saying, what we're doing is not working. Mm-hmm. And as a pastor, I used to love to tell anecdotal stories. I still do. But when I would tell them at a board meeting, some of the businessmen or women in my board would look at me and their eyes would kind of roll back, and they'd say, show me the data. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to see what's changing. Yeah. And that used to be frustrating to me at some level, to be honest. But part of the problem was I really didn't know where to find that data. And as I've gotten older and started working for Glue and rubbing shoulders with you and Eric Swanson and others, listening to Rob Kelly at Fort Charlotte, then I begin to go, oh, wait a minute, this and Barna, with their 5 areas of human flourishing, all of a sudden you begin to go, oh, wait a minute, there actually is data. Yeah. I'll never forget that when Barna did their State of the City here in Kansas City almost 2 years ago. I think you had one in Dallas as well. Yep. They showed the 5 circles of human flourishing, and they gave them either a red, a yellow, or a green. Yep. And we had 2 reds and 2 yellows, and only 1 was green. Wow. And that's pretty sobering when you think about maybe 2,500 churches in a city, all of the hours, all of the people that are, all the resources being spent, and our city flourishing is going down. Yeah. And not that work is bad work, but I guess the challenge that I would have for us as church leaders is to say, who says we have to work in the silos we've always worked in? Who says we have to be separated by denominations or by race or by age, or on and on and on? Who says women can't lead, right beside men, et cetera? Just so you can take it all the way down to a very granular level. The way we've been doing church hasn't changed our society in the right direction. And I think it's a very sobering thing. And I don't say that disparagingly. I actually feel quite encouraged because now that we actually can look at the data, we can see, all right, well, when we work this way together, things actually do change.
Yeah.
And that should be encouraging to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we've gotten much smarter, even in just the past 2 or 3 years, with what it looks like for us to test effective interventions for community impact. That's encouraging for me because I'm also a data nerd.
I enjoy my time with you, Jonathan, when we
Yeah.
get together and talk about these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Hey, as we zoomed in and zoomed out we went from individual from the micro to the macro. Let's zoom back into the micro a bit before we close today. I'd love to hear some kind of a story about something that has changed. It could be anecdotal if you want. Maybe it involves a person or a business or a region, and then I'd like to make an application before we go.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a great story, and it's somewhat personally relevant. I'd say this was one of the things that a little under a year ago helped me kind of regain hope in what we're doing, and prompted me to stay with our organization and actually come on full time this past fall. But we have a platform called Help Finder, where we help people coordinate around programs that are available to individuals who have needs in the community. And we train people on how to navigate that platform so they can show people how to access resources that are pertinent to their needs. So that training is called the Navigator Training. And as it was early on in its iteration, we were really training whoever was willing and whoever was interested in becoming a navigator to be able to help them in whatever their context was. And I don't remember what the initial connection with this man was, but there was a man named Steve who was working with Marketplace Chaplains, who reached out to me, and he said, hey, I see this thing called the Navigator Training. I think this is great. This is especially relevant for my work because I have needs all the time. I'm not exactly sure how to deal with, but I think a platform like this would really be helpful in that. So we were able to take Steve through the training. He became a trained navigator. And the next week, an introduction was made between our executive director and Steve with a third-party company that we work with, where they had introduced Steve as a potential partner for how to make our way into the marketplace, into the business sector. And so our executive director started emailing with him and specifically asked him about the navigator training. And he said, not only am I familiar with it, I am a trained navigator as of about a week ago. And
That's awesome.
It was incredible. And really just a significant God moment of just this opportunity for us to interact in a space that we aren't traditionally involved, which is the business sector. It's not that we don't want to be there. We just don't have a lot of inroads. And just the opportunity that God provided for us to interact with someone who had kind of unique access, and then for us to also provide value to him, and just the opportunity for him to see how he could provide value on the shared platform that is Helpfinder, and how that intersected with what he's doing for his job on a daily basis, and how he could help meet people's needs better through that platform. So like I said, that was incredibly encouraging for me.
Yes.
Because I got to see not only kind of tangibly the value that we got to add for Steve and for what he was doing in his job, but I also saw how God is making things happen behind the scenes, and even this incredibly low likelihood chance, this connection that ended up providing value for us, which helped us move forward in a new and innovative way. So that's just one example of how God is doing things here.
The story kind of illustrates all of what we talked about in the podcast in one story.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to make a very shameless plug here at the end of the podcast, if you've been listening today, to say that I love KC, and we're not alone in this by any means. There's others we're collaborating with. All America would be one for sure. But we've begun in the last 2 years looking at our city differently. most of the years I've been in Kansas City, most of the organizations I've been a part of, kind of looked at our city with a scattershot approach. Let's do something from wherever we are. Could have been on one side of it or the other, and try to do something all the way across. And most of the time it would have some pretty good adoption nearer. If it started in Johnson County, maybe it has good adoption all the way to the Kansas border. And then when you get into the Missouri side of the line, it just kind of doesn't go very far. And I saw the same thing happen with initiatives that started in Missouri and didn't make it into Kansas, or initiatives that started in the inner city and never made it north of the river, et cetera. And I watched this happen over and over with really good people and really good intentions. And a couple of years ago, I just felt convicted that we needed to begin a regional approach. And with the help of Joel McGill from All America, we began to say, we can't do everything. We're still small. We're kind of like the little train that could, to quote a book my grandkids read. But let's do what we can. So we identified the 5 outcomes of the Great Commission: prayer and evangelism, evangelism and discipleship, compassion and justice go together, Bible engagement, and then church planting. And if we were able to move the needle on those 5 outcomes, we could make tangible progress fulfilling the Great Commission, both in word and deed, in our city. And so we made a commitment to Love KC and All America to become a backbone organization that would work together across our city to come up underneath a collaborative effort in all five regions. So we divided Kansas City into 5 regions. North of the river is its own region. It's all in Missouri. And then if you take the state line that divides our city in the middle, you have a north and a south. So the north on the Missouri side is KC-Mo. The south is Jackson County, Lee Summit area, Grandview, et cetera. Then if you go over to the Kansas side, you have Johnson County, and then you go up north to Wyandotte County and Leavenworth up to the river. And so those form the 5 regions. We began to look for anchor churches and collaborative pastors and leaders and business people inside of those regions, and now have 2 regions kicked off and running. A third one is starting this within a month. By the end of the year, we hope to have all 5 regions up and going. And our efforts are really to convene. So we'll convene each region twice a year, and maybe more in terms of other sub meetings, but at least bring all the people together in the 5 region, in those individual regions twice a year, and then bring all 5 regions together once a year. And that's our effort for now. It may morph and change over time, but the one that started meeting first, Region 3, is off and running and really seeing some good progress. And I'm real excited about what's happening there. It feels like I think we're in our 3rd or 4th meeting now, and it really feels like people enjoy being together. They understand why we're together. They're working on their individual finish lines. So people are subdividing out into, well, I'm really interested in prayer, or I'm really interested in compassion and justice, or I'm really interested in church planting. And we're starting to get some real synergy around, hey, can we meet on our own offsite? Well, of course you can. Like, please do. Mm-hmm. And so we're beginning to feel like this effort, is an effort that probably we really can only evaluate maybe in 3 to 5 years. Its efficacy is going to probably be proven over time to whether we can really move the needle. But the beautiful thing I like about it is that no one really owns it. It's owned by the leaders of the city. Love KC facilitates it. All America helps a ton. But it's you, as Scott Beck, my boss at the Lou, would say, no, go ahead and bring your logo. Go ahead and bring your ego, but just work side by side for the same cause. And so we're seeing some progress. We're excited about the progress we see. We have actually a lot of hope that we haven't cracked the code, but we feel like we're at least have our ear close to the safe, and we're hearing some tumblers fall. So we're on that journey. Yeah. And I just wanted, the shameless plug is, if you're listening today, I just want to encourage you to follow up with me at Gary@lovekc.net, and we can help get you details. If you go to lovekc.net, our website, and you go to the discipleship tab, our whole website's broken down into pray, care, share, disciple. So when you go to the disciple tab, you'll find what we call the every plan. And we just believe if God cares for every person, we ought to have a plan for every person. And if you don't have a plan, you have more of a wish than a goal. And we don't want to be people who are wishing things away. We really want to have strategies and plans and tactics where we actually could see every single person in Kansas City hearing the gospel from a friend and having multiple opportunities to receive the gospel. So love to have if you're listening today, I'd love to have your participation in that. And you can do it from any part of the city. You can do it with any skill set, whether you're a business person or a church leader. And what young or old, you probably have a passion set in one of those 5 outcomes, and we would love to have you at the table. So how's that, Jonathan? Do you want to be a part?
I want to be a part. I'm excited. I wish I lived in KC. I'm ready to get involved. I'm ready to go to the disciple tab.
Yeah. We'll go there and look. So we will, Jonathan, you and I'll get to connect again at LAR, Los Angeles Ranch. I know we're both grateful for Eric Swanson and the way he convenes cities. We're learning from each other. And our hope and prayer is that people who listen to the podcast will learn right along with us. So if you're listening today, this has been the Blessed Podcast with Jonathan Walls and from Unite Dallas. Encourage you to subscribe and to share. If there was something that motivated you today, you know where to find me at Gary@lovekc.net. Jonathan, where could they find you if they wanted to drill down a little bit further on anything you said today?
Yeah, so they can reach me at Jonathan, Jonathan, at unitethechurch.org. And then you can also just look at our website, unitethechurch.org, if you want to see more in depth what we're doing here in Dallas.
Yeah, it's a good website, by the way. Very, very well done. Well, thank you for listening today. And I'm going to close the same way I started, saying there's not a greater joy in the world than to join Jesus where he's already at work. And start where you live, learn, work, and play. And you're going to find that God's already working out ahead of you. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening from the folks at Love KC. We hope you enjoyed our program. See you next time.